Hello. All right. I was in the middle of building my site analytics, and if you were following along with that, I think it was like number 18 or 19, where I realized that I probably needed to make changes to my authentication service, which I normally use CrowAuth. Um, and CrowAuth works just fine. I have a couple services that are running on that, but I wanted to give myself, I wanted to make some changes, and those changes would have been breaking to the current version of CrowAuth. So instead, I decided to take a break and go back to CrowAuth and look at what was going on and see if I could change anything for version 2. And as I was looking at version 2, I started thinking, and I've talked about this before, that maybe I'll just open source Crow Authentication. Just make it open, and then offer like a managed service, similar to my plan with site analytics. And as I was looking through that service and really kind of what it was and how I designed that API and everything, I noticed that there were a few changes that I would have rather done. And those changes, while I could have done a V2, it might have actually been more appropriate to just make it its own service as open source. So instead of redesigning and adding a version 2 on top of what I had done previously, just make a completely new service based on CrowAuth. So pretty much open sourcing CrowAuth, but having it contained in this repo. And one second. Pretty much starting from scratch. I will definitely use a lot of the code from CrowAuth, especially like the cryptography stuff. But there were a lot of changes that I felt I wanted to make. This is not going to have a front end, so it will only be coding up the back end. And since I have a working version of this, just not with the structure, I'm pretty much restructuring all the code. It just doesn't have the structure that I currently want. I'm going to build it all in public and stream it all, similar to what I'm doing for site analytics. So this is a detour from site analytics to change the way that my authentication service works. I did off stream, before I made the decision to make this public and make it open source, I did design the API. This is all my authentication service. I'll put a link in the description under a branch called New and Improved. Depending on when you watch this, this might be in main, because I plan on merging it in afterwards. Originally, my authentication service, this was my very first attempt at making an authentication service, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad, but you know, it wasn't great. It was Lambda functions instead of CDK. It was all static YAML, static cloud formation, but it worked. It worked just fine. But this is going to be a new and improved version of that. I kind of went in waves. I started off, I had one authentication service on something called Elsewhere. Oh, that's not it. Yeah, so this was Elsewhere, and it had its own kind of baked in authentication system, which worked pretty well. And then I made this authentication system, which was based on the original one, but in its own contained unit, so that I could redeploy it for whichever projects I wanted to. And it was pretty easy. I had like a bootstrapping script, and it worked. I mean, it was a perfectly fine little service in and of itself. Then I made CrowAuth, which was kind of multi-tenant, so I only had to deploy it once, and then I could create as many applications off of that one deployment as I wanted to. And that worked for a long time. And now this is just the next evolution of it. So everything kind of goes in waves, and everything's iterated upon, so which is, I think, a good thing. So let's look at, I guess we can look at it in here, at the design that I have come up with so far. So, like I said, I want this similar to the site analytics to be something that anyone can come to and deploy. That was the goal. So, 3 simple commands to get it started: install, send, deploy. I have a couple features written up here. This wasn't, I wouldn't say really complete, but it's there. The data model, this is going to be more or less based off of CrowAuth. So let's look at what this is. All right. So we have an app ID. An app ID is the entry point to everything. So as you'll notice on the endpoints, on the API key, on the API design, not the API keys. I will talk about the API keys in a second. Everything stems off of this post application. After that, you can get it by the application ID, or when you get down to dealing with users, those users are based on a specific application. And that's just inherent to the multi-tenancy of this solution. Another thing that I thought of doing, and one thing that I could still go back to, is just having a /users and then passing the application ID as a query parameter. So get users off of application ID. Maybe I'll go back to that actually. I was toying with that for a little while. And my latest push was just this. I might go back to that though. And then there are a few stages that users have to go through before they are actually a user in the system. And those can also be seen in the data model. So the first one is going to be unverified. I've done this in all of my authentication systems, verification through email. Just because you make an email and password doesn't mean that I'm going to respect that. When you sign up with an email and password, that's all stored in the unverified item with a time to live, so you can't, that email doesn't last forever pretty much, and the entry doesn't last forever. The passwords are hashed. I think I used bcrypt. I think that was the library. So I cannot see the passwords. Those are all stored safely. Once you get the email at your email, you verify that you own the email by coming back to whatever front end you're using, and you hit the verification endpoint. And when you verify, you give it the token. I'll talk about the API key stuff later. After you verify yourself, so you have a correct token, then that user becomes active. Then you use that same email and password to log in. This is new for me. The created, I'm just going to start putting that on stuff. And the last sign in, I'm not worried about created on these types of items, these sort of keyed items, because they have a TTL. So they're not going to be around. And if I really want to know when they were created while they're still around, I can just take that TTL, subtract off the amount that's configured to be the TTL, and then I'll have the created time. So I'm not too worried about that. Then a user's active. One thing that I haven't done before, which I am in this, when users log in and they get their token, they are going to receive a token, which is just a JWT, and a refresh token. I have not done refresh tokens before, but I definitely see the merit in them. So I want to try to implement something that works with those. Even if they don't work right off the bat, that's something that I want to do, at least moving into the future. So when someone logs in, when they do a get token, they have two options. They can pass in their refresh token, or they can pass in their email and password. So on the front end, what that would look like, if um, if a user is trying to take an action and the JWT is expired, hopefully the front end will see that. The front end will say, "Hey, I have a refresh token. Let me do this all in the background." The front end on its own will go get a new token, change out its local storage or cookie or cache or whatever it does for the user session, however it stores that, and then passes the rest out. Or sorry, it can use that new JWT, and it still has a refresh token behind the scenes. One thing that is possible, I don't. This should be underneath this, but whatever. One thing is possible that a user forgets their password, right? If a user forgets their password, what they can do is this endpoint, which is a password reset endpoint, it will send an email to the email given. So they would have to pretty much re-verify that they own that email address. Once they do that, they'll get a token similar to the verification token, very similar flow, and then they can create a new password with a token and their new password. So they have to prove that they own that email still by this. So it's pretty much like a, what is it, passwordless login, where you either get a text message or an email address with a token, but instead it's done once and then they can just use a password instead of always having to go to their email. Let's see. While I'm in here, maybe some future improvements include passwordless login. I use the verbiage sign in, sign out. Third party auth. That's a very popular one. Yeah. Let's see what else. Then there are also like your standard get, put, delete. So you can get a user by their email address. You can put or update a user's metadata. So I included a field in the data model, which is just a map. And then you have delete. So if a user wants to delete themselves, then they can. Onto the API keys. I wanted an API key for everything that is under /applications. So what I think I'm actually going to remove this stuff. So it's just going to be users. Yeah. So all of the users endpoints are going to require an application ID query parameter. I'll just put that in here. All /users endpoints query string parameter called application ID, and that will tell me what application that user is being acted on for. Is that right? Do you do that for like a post or whatever? Let's see. I've been using this website. Whoever put this website together, kudos. It has pretty good information. Normally it's by method, and then it's kind of slow right now. I don't know if people normally put query string parameters in posts. Hmm. Yeah, I guess that's a good reason. I also think it's kind of weird, but I didn't know if it was weirder to have it all under like such a huge tree, I guess. Hmm. I guess if anyone has any opinions, reach out and let me know. I'll leave it the way it is pushed right now. So application. So if you were in a browser, say, um, like Site Analytics, this could be hard coded into the URL because I will know my application ID at the time of deployment. And then these is just finishing out the URL. So I think that's what it would look like. I got sidetracked there for a second. Back to the API keys. So what that looks like, everything will require an API key except the users. And within the users, there are some nuances. So if you're creating this one requires an API key, right? Starting here until here, I guess. And then also, where's get users? Also here. Um, those all require a valid API key. And the reason, let me move this up. And then there's one other I wanted to move up. Yeah. So the reason I wanted to do that, if this is deployed separately, if this is like self-managed, or if this is if this is self-managed, you would think that the owner of the application would responsibly give out API keys where needed. So no one, it's like an admin thing, right? You wouldn't want random people to be messing with the applications or creating applications unless they're a trusted user. For the managed version that I will be putting out that will succeed CrowAuth, I will have the API key and I alone, and I will put a thin layer of authorization on top. So the thin layer would include knowing what users exist. So you'll have to also log in, to the managed auth service. I will then have your not credentials, but your ID. I will know who you are. I will know which applications you own, and then I will only let you retrieve from those applications that you own. So there will be an authorization layer on top, but I didn't want to include authorization in the authentication service. So it'll be a little different. Yeah. So the application's endpoints will require an API key. The user's endpoints will not. And the reason they will not is because they will be part of a front end. They will be called from a front end, and we don't want to put an API key on a front end. Doesn't make sense. So I had that whole, I don't know how much I talked about it when I was going through the site analytics, but one of the reasons that I came back through to redo the authentication service was because it didn't make sense to authenticate as the application itself and then send another request as an authenticated application, because the application ID and secret are in the front end, or would be in the front end, in which case you might as well just do the application ID and act like the user. So the only one that's really open is this one, to create a new user. After that, this is API key protected. This one is not, because a user does not have credentials, right? This one does not, because a user is getting credentials. After this, a user has their credentials. They have their JWT that can be used to call downstream services, right? If a user forgets their password, oops, right here. If a user forgets their password, how can we expect them to be authenticated? So we can't require an API key. Well, we can't require a token to reset a password because they don't have their password, they don't have their credentials. But we also don't want to require an API key because this action will most likely be done by a user through a front end. Here, we also don't want to require an API key or a token because they are proving their ownership of their identity through the email that we sent to that email address. Now these, when a user is actually messing with their information, we require the email, which can be pulled out from the JWT, and and I have ideas about this email. I think that might change, but to just an ID, but they don't. It doesn't require an API key because it will be called from the front end, but it does require a valid JWT, which that JWT will come from the authentication service itself, from here. So they will have to be signed in, and that JWT that gets sent to the authentication service will be validated against the ID that they send in here. So what I need to think about doing is, instead of having this be an email, I think that this should be an ID. And if I want that to be an ID, that means that I need to adjust my data model to include an ID, but also not obfuscate an ID and an email so far that I can't retrieve one without the other. I just don't think it's necessary to have the email floating around all over the place. Another reason, I guess, can you do crypto in the browser? That would be an important piece. Let's see. I think you can, but I just need to make sure. Yeah, here's browser support. Key. What? Okay. Yeah, that's what I use for the algorithm and that KTY. So it's all part of the Web Crypto API, not to be confused with Web3. I thought it'd be a little more apparent, but it's not. I'm pretty sure you can. Let's see. Because the reason why this is important is because if I am going to send back a token, then I will also need to, in the browser, read that token and then use the ID in these endpoints to update them. Oh, what in the world? I don't want this weird GitHub clone. I saw something about web in here. Oh, that's a bad thing to search. kind of test for the browser do you have? JWKS? I don't know what this is actually testing. QUnit? I don't know what QUnit is. Browser? Distribution browser? Maybe it's like a different bundle with the browser? Let's see. That's not what I'm looking for. There. Okay. It looks like it does. So I think the beautiful thing about Jose is that there are no dependencies. It only uses the JavaScript built-in crypto packages. Vendor specifics and markup annotation. I don't know what this means. But it looks like they will. Yeah, because crypto is the only thing that is required by this. So I don't know. Where's the package? I guess when it gets built, does it... Build browser. Yeah, I mean, it's there. I don't know if you import it differently or how you even get it. I just want to know how to do it. Why is this not just like very apparent? Wrong Jose, buddy. Nope. Not what I'm looking for. Yeah, I don't know how... I don't know how to, like, download it in the browser. And I don't know if you even can. Oh wait, I just saw something about no dependencies using runtime's native crypto. So that's how. I don't know. its own thing. Don't know how to do it. Interesting scripts he's got. Oh boy. I was hoping he would show me how browser would import this. Can you do, I don't know, can you even do that in the browser? I don't even know if it is. I feel like it should be in a CDN somewhere. Let's see if there were any issues. Browser. Oh, this is that original one. How many pages are there? Oh, that's it? There's nothing in here about browsers. Yeah. I don't know if you can. I didn't think about that. Let's think. Yeah, if you can't do any like decoding in the browser, I mean, okay, I say you can't. I'm sure you can. I'm sure there's a way to. I'm sure you can like, oh boy, without a library. Oh yeah, I guess you can just decode it. It is just base64 encoded JSON, right? Isn't that all a JWT is? Yeah, there you go. Doesn't validate it, but anything that's well formed can be decoded. Validates server side. Okay. So that the JWT should be validated server side, but in the browser, I can at least decode it. Which I guess makes sense. And this is from Auth0. I'd be, I think I'd trust that. Wait, what? So you have to, you can't just, oh, install, then run. Oh, so install it, and then what? Copy the file from the build folder to your project somewhere. Oh, whoops, that's the same link. So I need to copy this. It's 2 years old. So I copy this to my, and then this is what, okay. I'm not opposed to doing this. Yeah, that might work. And that would decode the JWT, and I could at least get the ID out of it. It wouldn't verify it, so there would still need to be verification, which I was planning on doing anyway because it does require valid JWT from the auth service itself. So a user could query for an ID if someone goes into the browser or makes the API call with their token for an ID that is not them. They would still be rejected because their ID would have to match the ID that they are querying for. Password reset, I think you'd still need an email because no one's going to know their ID offhand. So that's why I still have to keep track of the email. The reason why I want to add the ID is if I'm a downstream service of this authentication service, if I'm receiving a JWT from the authentication service, I may very well not want to store that email address. I may just want to store an ID that is opaque so that I do not have to deal with PII, if that makes sense. So there's a data boundary there. How bad is it to yeah, how bad is it to throw around an email address? I don't think it's bad. All right. Oh, thanks, Alex. Well, that's a security problem then. I will change that. So I shouldn't even have user email. This should be like a hash of a user email. Hmm. Hmm. We have very divergent answers here. All right. I don't think I should be storing that metadata then. Um, yeah, I don't think I should be. At least not unencrypted. But I don't know how you would. I'm hoping there's like a security answer. How does Auth0 do it? Hmm. Maybe there needs to be like the metadata stuff would need to be a separate. I don't know if that really belongs in like an authentication service because now it's starting to get into like a user management service. And I don't know if I want to deal with the security concerns that come along with that. Hmm. So maybe I'll take the metadata out. I mean, I don't currently use it in like CrowAuth or other authentication services. Um, but this would be instead of hashed or actual email, it needs to all be like a hashed email, which I can do. That's fine. So let's see, where else was email used? With email. So what would happen with like the hashed email? They would pass in their email similar to their password, and that email would then be hashed so that I do not own that. I do not have that email. I have a hash of that email, which is obfuscated from me. And then when they same with this, when they pass their email in through the endpoint, I don't actually have that email. I hash that email, make sure that there's an entry in my database, and then send an email to the user with the email that was passed in to me. And then I get rid of the email and I don't have it anymore. I think I should get rid of the metadata. Go to last password. Change. Timestamp. Yeah. And then the email stuff should just be a hashed email. So what would happen if you're unverified and you give me the token, then I find this item. Oops, I would find this item. I would grab the hashed email, the hashed password, make sure that it's before the TTL is done. I would take these, I would take this, create an active item based off of your hashed email, insert the hashed password, update the password change, the sign in, and the created. And I wouldn't need any more information. I wouldn't actually need the email address. To me, the email address is just a string. That's it. And then maybe instead of an ID, I use the hashed email. And that becomes the ID. So when someone tries to get themselves, these instead of email could just be me. It could just be like hard-coded me. But there's no metadata, so that endpoint doesn't need to be there. But you can get and delete yourself. Okay. Email. That would have to happen to reset the password. Because I need to send them an email. Same with creation. They need to pass that in. I will then hash it, but I need that actual address to send them an email. When they send it in here, check that hashed email exists as an active user. Send email with token to reset password to the email that was passed in. And then instead of their email address being the sub of the JWT, it will just be their hashed email. Oh, I need to add a space to all these. Sure. I think that works. Yeah. One other thing. I need to design my token. Or rather the structure of it. And I have done this in CrowAuth. So you're about to get a peek at what CrowAuth looks like. When you sign in, get a token. That token looks like this. I forget what all these correspond to. It's like this is, yeah, it's got to be your, like, whatever the URL is. Hmm. Issuer will be configurable. Subject will be the hashed email. Audience. Oh yeah, I messed that up when I first did it. Subject token is the... Oh yeah, sub is just like a generated... Let's see, GWT subject. I think it's like a... It's just like a hash or a nonce or something. Subject claim identifies the principal that is the subject of the JWT. The claims in a JWT are normally statements about the subject. The subject value must either be scoped to be locally unique in the context of the issuer or be globally unique. The processing of this claim is generally application specific. The sub-value is a case-sensitive string containing a string or URI value. Use this claim is optional. I don't know what people normally put the subject as. They just have it as like a nonce. Subject of the recipient for which the JWT is intended. What is that? What is the odd then? You have expiration time, not before time, issued at time, JWT ID. Yeah, what is the audience then? Service that JWT is intended for. Each principal intended to process the JWT must identify itself with a value in the audience claim. If the principal processing the claim does not identify itself with a value in the odd claim when this claim is present, then the JWT must be rejected. The odd value is an array of case-sensitive strings, each containing a string URI value. In the special case, when the JWT has one audience, the odd value may be a single case-sensitive string containing a string URI. The interpretation of audience values is generally application-specific. Okay. The audience of a token is the intended recipient of the token. The audience value is a string, typically the base address of the resource being accessed. What? I see. Well, since I don't know what the audience is, I'll just say it's user defined. I could see that. I could see someone wanting to configure something like that if they're doing their own self-managed instance. I will not. I will not need that because I will not know exactly who will be using it. I will use Xflow. Was it IAT? Since I don't issue these before they're being used, I don't need NBF. You get them for the must be assigned and managed. Hmm. All right. Is that what it looks like? And then whatever claims. Hmm. I don't know if this is right, like how I'm putting this, but the subject will be the hashed email. That'll be like the user ID. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there should be claims. Maybe that's what the update would be. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know who should have access to do that though. Hmm. That wouldn't be hard to add in later though. So if someone wants custom claims to be enabled, I'll design that API with them at that time. So there are my endpoints. This didn't really do anything, so I might delete that later. Hmm. Oh, it's already deleted. Um, I like viewing it in GitHub better. Looks a little easier. All right. Do a little design review. So for applications, you can toggle them on and off pretty much. So if you don't want people to log in, like if you're deprecating a service or something, You can do that. I also, one thing that I do want to try to figure out is, oh, yeah, I can just do like service accounts. Let's see, let's see. What would I call that? Instead of a user, it would be a service account. Um, Maybe like that. I'll make that a future feature because I don't use it now. Um, but pretty much it would be a user that doesn't have to be verified, is effectively what it would be, more or less. Um, Change the state of an application. You can delete the application. I do keep user count similar to a couple other things I've done, so that shouldn't be hard to implement. We want to get all of the application's users. That would involve a. I don't think I'm gonna. Mm, Maybe like no, that would be under here, right? Yeah. I don't think I want to allow that because that would be a query or a scan. It'd be a query on application ID filtering the sort keys of actives. But that could get costly and slow. Yeah. This is just authentication. This isn't a user service. I need to remind myself of that. It's only authentication. It is not a user data service. Hmm. But what if someone? I'm trying to think of like future iterations, like this password list. Like let's say someone wants to put in their phone number, or if it's actually passwordless, then how would I add in? I guess they would say this is my email, verify me, and then I could have a new type of item that's like passwordless email, and then a hash with the token. But what about phone number? What if you wanted a passwordless logon with your phone number? And it's the same email. Like you would go back to the same ID. Should I have an ID? Hmm. Like a passwordless sign in. How would I? Let's see. I definitely start off the same way, and then passwordless with a token. It'd have to have a token, like they would give me a token. And then hmm, shoot. I wonder if I should put an ID in front of it. I don't even know what a passwordless flow looks like. Someone like give their email address. I guess maybe I should look at that. Didn't do what I wanted it to. Oh boy. Yeah, I don't really even know what it looks like. User enters a phone number or an email. The application sends phone number, sends it back. User enters code. Now user's logged in. But how do you connect the phone number to their account? Hmm. So what would that look like? I guess maybe I'm trying to connect the accounts and I shouldn't be. I mean, like maybe it should be a hashed password and like hashed phone, and if you log in with your phone, you can only log in with your phone. I don't know. Maybe. And then there's no just like set entry in the database. So let's see. Let's say if someone only wanted to do a one time password, then they would enter their phone number. And then in here, I would do something like, yeah, like passwordless token. And I would have hash of whatever, I guess like their ID. And it would be a hash of phone number or email and a TTL. And then when they log in, then there'd have to be a separate, oh boy, there'd have to be a separate like um, endpoint for them, like get I don't know, passwordless token. And then I wouldn't need to store anything because it wouldn't have a password. Um, but I might want to still store a hash of whatever it is that they're logging in as. And see, that's where I'm getting confused. If I want to hold stuff like this, I guess password change doesn't matter, but sign in and created might matter. Then if I want to hold all that in one bucket, so pretty much the hash of their phone number or email. So maybe I assign them an ID. And then I have something. Oops. I don't know why I need active in front of this. I guess we'll do, yeah. And then this could just be like, oops, an ID. And then the ID will have stuff like that. Last password changed, last sign in, when it was created, kind of metadata. And then this, that would be centralized. And then when someone logs on, I don't know if people normally associate, like if someone logs on as a one-time password, is it associated with an ID? Like, I don't know. Or let's say OAuth, or sorry, third-party OAuth. If I wanted to support that, then I would do something similar to this, but it would be like Google, and it would have their like, I don't know, Google ID, and then I would link it back to an ID. I don't know. I don't know what the best way to do this would be. And it matters now because the data model is kind of tricky to change around later on. That's why I'm trying to go through this right now. I think the flow with OAuth, I have done it before. Let's see if I still have the repo in here. Yeah. It was something else. There was a callback, you need a client ID. User by verified email. Ah, okay. So Google does send you back an email. And then they also have an ID, a Google ID. I kind of remembered that part. I didn't remember that they sent you back an email. So Google would I want another entry for that? Does it even matter? I guess I could do this. Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. If I left it like this, so if someone logged in with a password and then they added their like phone number to their ID, then what I could do is like phone hashed number, and then it would go back to the ID. Similar to how the Google ID would, and then they can all correlate back to this ID. So if someone has, and then okay, yeah, and then so it just matters who creates this first. That would go back to ID. So let's say someone, good night. All right, let's say someone logs in first with a passwordless phone number. I don't, is that possible? Could you do that? Could you like sign up as a, what does OAuth do? Their little pages. Show me your little pages again. To sign in or create an account. Okay. So if you're doing passwordless and you check something. You're doing passwordless. You sign in with your phone number, and I don't have record of the phone number, the hashed phone number. Then what I do is create an account with an ID, and then you can log in with that ID. Once you, right, so it would, if there is, oh boy. So you enter a phone number, right? These are all just methods of logging in. These are just methods. This is the actual account. Depending on how you log in, let's see. Methods used to an array of sign-in methods, which are email, phone, Google, etc. So this is what links all of these back to their ID. So when someone logs in first, let's say I want to first log in with passwordless phone, and then I want to create an email and a password. I would log in first with my phone number. My application would look for the phone number. It would not see that a phone number exists in the database, well, the hash number, nor that, I guess it should also be hashed Google ID, I guess. No, that's probably safe to store just a Google ID. Famous last words. If not, I'll hash it later. So you have a hashed number, it doesn't exist. So I would create this entry and this entry with the ID. Then I would add in the sign-in method. I wouldn't do a password change. That would just be the time of created. Last sign-in would be time of created. Created would be whatever time. Then I would issue a passwordless, or I would create this item, which is a passwordless token with an ID. That would be sent over SMS, right? To the user. When they got it and they logged in, there would have to be like a passwordless sign-in page and endpoint. They would log in. It would know that it's looking for a passwordless with its token. It would find the ID. It would, all it needs really is the ID. Then it would log in with I would return a token corresponding with the audience. Is it the audience? The subject being the ID. And everything goes back to this guy. And no matter, so that's the user with their ID. It doesn't matter what method you use to get to that to get back to that ID, so long as this ID corresponds with whatever entry. And then if I later wanted to add my email, to my account, there would have to be some endpoint, probably the put. Too bad I deleted that. Let's be a put. And then they could do something like, I don't know, add a sign-in. Yeah. Add sign-in method. Allow adding sign-in method. So they could add their phone number to it for passwordless login. They could add their email address and a password. That's fine. And if they add their email address, what we would do is just go through this flow again. We would issue an unverified item, send them an email with a token that they could then log in with. And once they do that, all this does, right, is add this item, the hashed email and a hashed password. It adds it. And this will be optional. An optional ID. And if the ID exists, then it will not create a new ID, but rather add that ID into here. That ID does exist. Wait, sorry, I think I stumbled over myself. If the ID exists in the unverified token item, it would add the ID here. If the ID does not exist in the unverified token item, it will create an ID and create this item. Yeah. So I think what matters is what you sign in with first. I don't know how I would do that because I don't know the intricacies of what it looks like. Could I send something in the callback? Callback URL. Because what I'm looking for is if there's a way to do something similar to what I did with this guy for Google. So if I could like send the ID in the callback or something. Otherwise, I think it would just be like you get the Google ID and then you get the email. Well, if you're looking, right, I would get the email. And if I have this person's email, then I know I know who they are, right, because I have that email. And if I get their email and I check in here for emails, yeah, somehow in the callback, this would have to check for emails. Oops. And if that email, these two can like correspond to each other. So the Google ID would have a hashed email. If that hashed email existed before, but if it, so whichever one is used, they should create each other. No. Whenever Google is used, it also gets the email. It would hash the email and store it in here with the ID the same as Google's. So if this guy, if you log in first through Google, and I want the email, what would happen is Google would give me its ID and an email. I would hash the email, I'd store it in this item, I would check for the hashed email in this type of scenario as like a sign-in method. If that email exists, I use the existing ID. If the email does not exist, I guess I would need to do this before I create the ID, right? So, okay, someone signs in with Google. I get the email. I check for the email. If the email exists, I take the ID and I add it to the Google item. If the email does not exist, I create an ID. So I create this item. Good night. I create the item. I add the ID to Google, and then I create a hashed email with the ID. No password. So then passwordless email would work and it would sync the account to the ID. Good night. And then it would also be referenced back to the Google ID. Would it need to do that? I don't think it would need to. If you sign in with your email first and then you sign in with Google, it would check if the hashed email exists, then it would pull the ID. I think that's what would happen. This might not need to be there. I might not need to store the hashed email in the Google ID. Or would I? Would I? No. Jesus. Oh boy. Yeah. So I think that's going to be the new approach. So we just have a user account, which is independent of how you sign into the user account. It's pretty much how it goes, and then you have all these different methods of signing in: email, phone, Google. Yeah, and these are only for email and password. Yeah, these are just methods of getting your email password reset and verifying an email. Wow, yeah, that's a lot. I'm just thinking through now. If you add a sign-in method, how do I verify it, like automatically? So once you would require verification flow. So if you, yeah, I think that's what would have to happen. You would have to do, yeah. So then there'd be like a passwordless login or get user. Get users token, and then maybe like a slash email. And then you'd have a slash email, slash phone, slash Google. Email verification. Yeah. And users email should I do email password reset? These are some long URLs. And then users email password. And then that's its own thing, yeah. What is this? Oh, that's the email verification. Holy moly. Yeah, these are some big URLs. So there'd be the token email and then token by phone. And this would oh. Get users, get let's take that off. Take that off. Email verification. What if you want to get So if I'm logging with my phone, what endpoint would I hit to trigger sending a one-time password to my phone? One second. Um, hmm. Maybe like user ID. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If I don't even know what that endpoint would look like. Maybe like get OTP, and then you would get a user token with an OTP. This would be application slash application ID slash users slash OTP. You want to get a one-time password. And that would be on all these. Does not require an API key. This is the payload. It will be something like phone equals whatever their number is. 555, 555, or email with just the address, no password. And then when they get a token, you can get it with OTP. So there are a couple different combinations I would have to look for. Should parameters be camel case or kebab case? And then the response payload will just be accepted because this will be async. Okay. And if it's Google, I don't know. If it's like a third party, I don't know what that would look like. But I've spent too much time thinking about all of this mumbo jumbo, so yeah. I think I'll go ahead and call it a day there. That was a lot more than I was originally planning on doing as far as like design goes. So maybe next time I will start on the infrastructure and the folder structure of getting all of these. That's a lot of endpoints. Getting all those figured out. But yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging in there. I know there was a lot of silence. I know I was thinking through a lot of things, but this was definitely good for me to go through. So, and this is just the kind of like the design phase, the preliminary phase for it. The things that I'm going to be trying to get out sooner rather than later, so not including the one-time password stuff or this stuff, that will be pretty much what CrowAuth was turning into what it will be. So a lot of that code should be more or less written. I know I'm going to have to tweak some stuff, but I don't think it'll be bad at all. So yeah, I'll probably try to start doing the infrastructure and the folder, I guess mainly the folder structure in the next video, and then hopefully I'll be able to get back to finishing out the site analytics once I have that stuff done. So this new version of the authentication service. So yeah, thanks for watching, and let me know if you want to use any of this. If you want any help setting it up, I'd be more than happy to help out. So thanks for watching.